probably won't look too dramatic, the fact that I'm painting a yellow rose when all this other yellow is here, but once we get all this straightened out, it'll look much better. As far as I can tell, this yellow looks the same as the other yellow, so I think we're fine. Kind of hoping it might be a little different color, maybe darker or something. Then again, it may be different and I just can't tell it.
A rose so sweet, it sounds so neat, my rose.
Getting ready to start the first sunbursting on this. It's done by hand. I've got what is referred to as the light brown. This typically, everybody tells me, has a lot more red in it, but I'm going to go around the outside edges with this right now and hopefully blend it into the center lightly, you know, leaving it full strength on the outside, and then as you go in, you just kind of get a little bit blendy with it and lighten it, you know, up, as you can maybe see I'm doing here. Around the outside edge, again, you just put it on pretty much full strength, and as you go into the inside, you lighten up your pressure and you kind of let it blend a little bit.
Mandolin, I know.
I'm going to take the dark brown and do something similar.
Top is scratched up.
And again, just kind of blending it in toward the center a little bit. Now I'll take just plain old denatured alcohol, which will blend this hopefully all back together. At least it always has done that. I hope it does it this time. Otherwise, I'll be extremely disappointed. And on this, the difference is you start in the center where you want it lightest and you work out. It's starting to blend. I've turned the rag over to get a clean surface there on the yellow in the center, and I'm wiping off more of the center again. Not looking too bad for our first effort there. Again, I'm going to take another clean piece of cloth there, and I'm going to start in the center and work my way out to lighten it up some more, bring out more of the highlights. And that looks really nice to me. Kind of hoping it'll stay that way. Now I'm going to take this kind of slightly polluted towelette, if you will, and I'm going to start working it in up and around the rose. And this way I don't get that area too dark. And then the only thing I have left to do then is just right up against it, and I can do that with a brush that's got a little bit of alcohol and maybe just the tiniest bit of dye, and cause that to blend the rest of the way. That's not too bad for a quick and dirty effort there. I have some of the denatured alcohol in this little container here. So it's just clear, that's all it is. And I'm just going in here and dampening these spots, and the dye will suck into those areas, I believe, without having to actually put any dye on the brush. That'll get rid of the white areas and let it blend.
Years of constant play with brand new strings, this beauty ring.
Wanted to point out something. I've started staining the top, and you can see it looks kind of splotchy, and you think, what is that square there and what is that square there? Well, believe it or not, and I know some of you won't agree with this, or you'll think I'm just making this up, but the truth is, this shows almost absolute perfection in this top. And you're thinking, why would that show perfection? Well, what it shows is that this is perfectly book matched. And you'd think, well, then why isn't it the same on both sides? Well, it is, and that's the reason it looks this way. If you could imagine this being closed together like this, and if there is a grain in the wood, let's say the grain is running through this way. Well, when you open it up, it's automatically going opposite directions. And as you climb the hill here, as you reach the peak, there's a line across. As you climb the hill here, as you reach the peak, there's a line across. The wood absorbs the dye, you know, because it's going in at these different angles. And so this angle would actually match this angle, and so the wood absorbed the dye in those two different places perfectly. And if you were to fold them back together, they would be exactly the same. It is actually showing perfection if you want to, choose to believe it that way. That's just the way it works when you do it the way I do it. I mean, I'm using these dies right on the raw wood, and the raw wood will take the die the way it feels like taking it, and that's the way it felt like taking it. So there you go. May not be your choice if that's what you were choosing, but unfortunately, there's not a thing I can do about the splotchy look of that, but it really does show that it is absolutely perfectly quarter sawn wood. My friends, off camera, I have spent a lot of time working on the staining on this. This is the first time I've ever stained one prior to putting the binding on it. Typically, I'm using plastic binding, so you can put the binding on, stain it, and then just scrape the binding clean. You can't do that with the wood binding. You're learning as you go. I've seen other mandolins done with wood binding, so I know it's possible. I'm not sure how they did it. This is the process I'm using this time. Now, I may never do it this way again. I don't know, to be honest. I really haven't foreseen all the problems I'm going to run into yet, I'm sure. I've got it close on the staining with the dyes, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to airbrush some additional dyes, and that also has lacquer in it, and so we're basically going to be airbrushing and sealing the sides and just around the perimeter top, and we'll see how that goes, and of course around the neck and things too. Once I get that airbrushing to the point where it suits me, then I think I'm going to move back to putting the binding on this thing and seeing how that's going to work. The problem with putting the binding on it at that stage is I'll have to scrape the binding down smooth to this and do some sanding, and it's going to ruin all of the different finishing edges that I'm touching up right now. It's just going to happen, and I know that's going to happen, so I don't know any other way around it though. I'm just hoping that'll be less than trying to do it the other way around. I mean, I know I'll have to do some fine detail touch-ups on the finish and things, but I'm hoping I can do that and avoid getting it on the binding. So here we go. Well, I'm out here in my spray booth. At least it's a pretty spray booth. Gonna do a little airbrushing on this with the dark brown and lacquer. So here we go.
Just as true today.
I thought I had it dark enough, but it doesn't look like it's getting too dark, so I might have to go do some darkening on this dye. I really want it to be very dark brown. Yeah, I think I'm going to go darken this up some. It's just not quite what I'm looking for yet. It's not bad, but it just needs to be a little darker. Places it seems to be working okay, and other places it doesn't. So I don't know what's up with that.
Created by a master with detail in his mind. A rose so sweet, it sounds so neat. My Rosa mandolin. Built to chop the rhythm and play a fast lead line. With calloused hands created.
Yeah, I've darkened it a little bit, and we'll see if that suits me. I think that's going to do it. I can see the difference.
One plain stroke at a time. Treasured now forever. Wood and heart entwined. I wouldn't take a million for my Rosa mandolin.
My friends, I interrupt this video to tell you about some new tools I bought. Chisels, in fact. I decided to just kind of do a little mini review on these for you so that you'll know what I bought and why I bought them and whether or not they're worth the buy. All through my years of doing this instrument work, I've just had a mixed, matched set of cheap chisels, basically. Most of them are probably made in the USA, but they were just a mix-match bunch of just little wood chisels, the kind that you would typically hit with a hammer. You know, I mean, they weren't anything special, but, you know, seemed to hold an edge pretty good. They were reasonably good quality, but nothing like a matched set of chisels. So I decided to go ahead and give those chisels to the apprentice, Caleb, and he's got those, and they, you know, have served me well for many years, so he can use those for now. I may actually spring and just buy him a set of these too. I like these that well. These are made in Germany. I believe they're referred to as two cherries. You can see there on the logo that they have two cherries on them. The name on it says Marke, M-A-R-K-E, and then it says with, or W-I, that might be L-H. Let me put these little things on because printing is so tiny. W-I-L-H period, and then it's got Schmidt and Comp, C-O-M-P, S-E-I-T 1858. I'm not sure what that stands for, but I'm sure that's a German word. Then they have their address there, which is 42853 REMSCHEID, and then Kongstrabe or something like that, CONIGSTRABE 59, Germany. Oh, mouthful. But anyway, and this has a little number 19 under it. This one also has a little number 19 under it. I'm not sure what that stands for. But anyway, that's everything that's on the label. Give you a close-up of the label so that maybe you can read it. Perhaps pause your screen and blow it up or whatever. Okay, so what set did I buy? I bought the 26 to 6. So I have the 6mm to the 26mm set. You know, what my concern was, will they hold an edge? Will they be easy to sharpen? Well, the answer to both of those is definitely yes. They hold a very good edge. These were kind of in the middle of the road price-wise. They weren't cheap. They were, I'm thinking I paid in the neighborhood of $175 for the set. I mean, that's just a guess. I don't remember. I bought so many tools in the last couple of weeks, I can't remember all the details. I would say these are definitely worth it. If money's tight and you don't want to spend the $400 or $500 for the really high-end sets, I would recommend these things for sure. I mean, $175 for 6 chisels is still a lot of money. But on the other hand, I can tell the quality is definitely there. I have been carving on this all the way around. I've carved this channel back out and cleaned it out. You can see the difference here, how this one has got finish on it and stain, and this one's all clean. And it actually takes more carving than you might expect. And I've been carving and carving and carving for about an hour or more. And when I got done carving with that chisel, I took it and did the shave test, and it's still shaved. No problem at all. So that tells me right there that they're, high quality stuff. They hold an edge, working really, really well. So if you're in the market for a good set of chisels, these 2 cherry chisels, I would not be afraid to recommend them at all. I get nothing out of that, by the way. I bought them with my own money. There's no sponsorship or anything. And I have no reason to say anything good or bad about them other than to just tell you the truth. And I do think they're great chisels. Decided I'm going to try to make custom binding for this mandolin. This will be the first time that I've used real wood binding on a mandolin. And it may be my last, or it may just not work at all. I don't know that I can get this wood to bend around those tight curves. On an A-style mandolin, I'm pretty sure I could do it no problem. But on this F-style, who knows? I'm going to use this quarter sawn sycamore, which hopefully you can see has a lot of grain and figure in it. And I think that'll make a beautiful binding. Here we go.
Dad said it's your birthday. Let's watch a bluegrass show.
There's an outside chance that this last strip will be big enough for the peg head. You never know.
Toward the front, the 6th or 7th row. The man on stage was talking. He called me by my name. I finished it this morning for this special boy's birthday. It was a tree sawn into boards, he'd begun to give it life. Slowly chipping at the wood, traditional design. His talent beyond measure, a gifted man you see, blessed by God to design this mandolin for me. You two, friend, could own.
Assuming the video footage turned out correctly, and you saw me bending these different parts, and this is, real wood binding that we're bending into these little tiny curves, and while it doesn't stay there, it can be bent back now that it's got that flex in there. I can bend it back and get it to fit the curves. So I think that it was successful. I didn't know how that was going to go, since that was the first time I've bent wood that small and to these tight of radiuses. That's some really tight bending right there, but it seemed to work just fine and barely cracked at all, and where it did crack shouldn't be a problem, can be glued back without any notice at all, I believe. So now we're going to attempt to put this on here.
The time is growing thin, the carver's getting older, but he is not gone yet. Don't tarry, place your order. He'll carve a dream, it's true, genuine and hand-produce a Rosa just for you.
Still working on the peg head binding up here. And all this is done freehand, and so I'm going to have to route a little bit more here because I don't have enough room to get the next piece of binding in. So, I just take my best guess at it when I'm routing it. Didn't guess enough in this case, so going to fix that right now. Ordinarily, I'd set up a fairly significant thing to hold this, but I think we can get by on this because I'm just routing a little tiny spot here. I just hope it doesn't backfire on me.
Built to chop the rhythm and play a fast lead line with calloused hands.
Well, that seems to work just right. It's just about the right size. I'm going to clean out the bottom of this a little bit. There's a little bit of glue squeeze out from the previous piece, and the part that I just routed wasn't quite as deep. Not that it really matters, but because we can level the top, and that's all that you see anyway. We'll show you what it looks like as we start to put that in there. I've been fitting this up for a while now, and I think I've got it pretty close. Being that it's real wood, you got to make it fit pretty darn tight in order for it to look good. So here we go.
One plain stroke at a time. Treasured now forever, wood and heart entwined, a rose so sweet.
I think you can see that it fits up in there pretty tightly. I've got to get this glued back in here and get this taped up, and I think we'll be ready to go with the final piece. I'm cutting out the spots for these point protectors. I do that by hand with the Dremel. I've done it different ways. I've inlaid that before and then put the binding on, and I've also put the binding on and then cut these out. And that's the way I'm doing this one. Because this one was wood, I went back to my old way of doing it. Not that it's any better or any worse, but I just thought I'd show you how I do it. And I do it with this little tool here that's on the end of my Dremel. It's kind of a beveled tool. It's got a flat bottom. The bottom cuts really good. And I'll just show you my technique here.
It sounds so neat, a Rosa mandolin.
It only takes a second to cut it out. I cut it out a little undersized, if you will, in this case, because I can always make it bigger and then make the piece fit better. And I stopped short of the edges, and I cut that out with a little X-Acto knife or whatever it takes to fit these little blocks in there, and then I carve the blocks to fit. So that's the way I chose to do this one. Like I said in the past, a lot of them I have put the block on there first, then put the binding on. But this is just another way to do it. I got the decorative blocks glued in on the points. The protector blocks is what they call them, I believe. Anyway, I'm just taking my Dremel and just carefully routing those off. It's a very delicate operation. You just have to take your time.
Yes, sir, she's a beauty. If you could only see the care he took.
When I get it close, then I do the rest by hand. And I'll finish it with scrapers and files and sandpaper, etc. And I've got to do that one as well.
Creating this mandolin for me. Thank you, mister.
The way I'm doing this for the camera is quite awkward, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it off camera and hold it the way I need to hold it, but you get the idea. Well, after putting the binding on, it's at the ultimate ugly duckling stage. Lots of little tiny fills and little things, you know, and you have to sand it smooth, and so you sand through the finish like that. And so now I'm going to attempt to touch all that up, and I can tell you already it ain't going to be easy, and it's going to be time consuming, and with little tiny paintbrush, microscopes, everything. Here we go.
Jerry, for my Rosa mandolin. It's a rose so sweet and sounds so neat, my Rosa mandolin. A rose so sweet, it sounds so neat, my Rosa mandolin. I know the top is scratched up from years of constant play. With brand new strings, this beauty rings just as true today. Created by a master with detail in his mind. A rose so sweet, it sounds so neat, my Rosa mandolin. Built to chop the rhythm and play a fast lead line.
It's time to make the binding for this fretboard going on this mandolin. I've got the bender heated up. It's at 350 degrees at the moment. That's Fahrenheit. We're about ready to make our first bend. First, I'll wet it down. I find that just misting it with this works just as well as soaking the wood most of the time. Sometimes you do need to soak it. I've sanded the bottom edge of this trim. This side goes down. This top edge is still rough, and it's going to be filed off to match the fretboard later, so it doesn't matter.
With calloused hands created.
Start around that larger radius first. I think it's going to need quite a bit more than that.
In plain stroke at a time.
Close. That's getting pretty close. Now I think I'm going to cut it off here to make it easier to work with. Make sure I cut off plenty. I don't want to short myself. Incidentally, when I'm cutting off thin wood binding like that, most of the time I just use these cutters. Works just as well as using a bandsaw. In fact, it's much faster and it works easily. Okay, I'm going to have to do a number of things here. I'm going to start the bend on this end before I go much further. It's going to be a little tricky bending that.
Treasured now forever.
I think we can make that work. This sycamore is pretty flexible wood in terms of being able to conform it to the shape. So if I can get it close, then when I put it in my molds, I can get it the rest of the way. So I think we're perfectly fine there. Now we'll make this little piece. And on this one, I'll start on the little bend on the very end first and let it run loose at the far end.
Good and hard entwined. I
think we can probably work with that. I'm going to just do a little bit more. pretty close.
A million for my Rosa man.
I think we'll make that work. Well, it's time to get the binding glued onto here. So I've got my Formula 560 canopy glue. Although, now that I think about it, since we're talking wood to wood, I think I'll just go ahead and use the tight bond, because I think it'll do just as well or better. We'll start with just that straight edge. And the trick of putting binding on with this jig is to make sure the binding stays down. It likes to work its way up, and then you don't have what you think you have. I have a wedge that fits the jig pretty well, and it, I think, will fit in here to tighten this up. Might have to slide everything that way a little bit just to make sure it's good and tight. Again, I was pressing down on the binding to make sure it's all the way bottomed out. Tap the wedge down in there just a little bit more. And now we'll go ahead and put the rest of the glue around the curvy parts here. It's a little bit sloppy, but it won't matter because it's on the wax paper. And we're going to wedge this into place and then do some cleanup. Well, I let this side set for several hours, 4 or 5 hours, and now we're going to put the other side on, and then we'll let it set overnight. This is the hardest bend to do. This seems like it would be, but actually this little bit right here, because it's so short and it has 2 curves in it, it's actually a harder bend to make. So I've been kind of off camera contemplating on how I'm going to do that. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this to approximate length. I'm going to leave it long, about 1/4 inch, just to get that out of my way. And I've already bent this a couple of times, so I think it'll flex into place once I lock this all down. So I'm going to go ahead and get the glue on it and just go for it, and then just force it into place is just about what it amounts to. The trick on this one is I want this piece all the way down to this corner so that it stays tight. And then push the whole thing up, and then got to make sure it's all down.
Dad said it's your birthday, let's watch a bluegrass show. We sat somewhere.
I've got the fingerboard pretty well cleaned up to the bottom. I've laid it on here just to test it, the fit, and it seems to fit really well. Very happy with that. I won't have to do too much fitting right along the neck and restaining, although I'll have to do some because it's just inevitable. I don't have the dots in it yet. I still need to bring this binding down to the height of the top of the fretboard, and I want to scallop this end. So I think I'll just start by scalloping the end, and we'll move on from there.
Toward the front, the 6th or 7th row. The man on stage was talking. He called me by my name. I finished it this morning for this special boys.
Well, it used to be that the StewMac fretboards, you could sand them down and get rid of all of the slots. This one's right on the edge and it's getting very thin. So I'm going to stop there, clean the rest up by hand. It may be that I'll still have to fill a little bit of these slots. I hate that, but you know, you got to do what you got to do. So there you go. I'm pretty happy with the way that turned out. I was able to get it all the way down, get rid of the grooves, and still retain, you know, a little bit of thickness there. Not very much. It's pretty thin, but it'll be okay because there is a fretboard extension that goes under that. And once I get this all planed down, it won't look like such a big disparity because right now this is standing up quite proud of the fingerboard and even of the frets. So it'll look a lot closer to, you know, normal, I think, once I get that down. And the way I'm going to get that down is I'm going to start with kind of a rough double cut file, or at least that's the way I think I'm going to do. And I'm just going to just go across this like this until I feel it start to touch just the ends of the frets. And when it starts to touch the ends of the frets, well, then I'll get a specific file to go in between each of the frets. And there I've reached the frets, so I'll just move on down and just keep doing that. And I'll show you what that looks like when I'm finished with that. Well, you can see what it looks like now that I've got it down to the tops of the frets. And then here, I've already started cleaning it up to the ends of the frets, as you can see. Now you can see the end of the fret, but it's actually the end of the binding where the fret is. How I cut that out, and what I do is I just take this little square file and I go in between the frets and just cut the binding down until I get it flush with the fretboard. So I'm going to do a lot of that, and I'll show you what that looks like when I'm finished with that. Well, she's starting to look like a real nice fretboard now. Got to put in the dots on the top and the side dots. And then we can glue it onto the mandolin. So we're getting close. I had the laser cutter cut out these dots. These are 5mm holes. I cut the dots to 5.75 millimeters. And the reason I did that is because they seem to fit better that way. There's a little bit of room around the dots when they're cut. Or the laser takes up a little bit of room, I should say, and therefore it just needs to be a little bit bigger. So, anyway, a little trial and error later. We've got them ready to go in here, I believe. I'm going to use this new glue that someone recommended. I think it's pretty good for things like this. It's a superphatic glue, ultra thin. It works with a lot of different materials. It's water cleanup, which is what I like about this. This laser cutter cuts things like this on a very slight bevel. So I'm turning them in with the small part of the bevel down and forcing them into place. At least I think I am. I think that'll be okay. Try another one. These might just be a hair too big. The 5.75, I probably should have just went to 5.5 instead of 5.75. But I can force them into place, and of course that means they're just going to be that much tighter on the inlay. I think it's going to work. But I might go back and adjust that for future to make them just a hair smaller.
It was a tree sawn into boards. He'd begun to give it life, slowly chipping at the wood. Traditional.
Well, I think that's going to be fine when I sand that off smooth and get it perfect. I'm going to try to drill the side position dot spots here, and I'm going to have to do it by hand. The 1.5 mil drill is just too small for the chuck on the drill press, unfortunately. So I'll just do the best I can. I've already marked them and I've already pre-punched with the awl where they go, so that should help guide the bit a little bit to keep it straight. I don't plan to drill them real deep, just about through the material here is about all the depth I'm going. Just drilling them down to where I can see the ebony, and then that should be deep enough. Well, they all look good. I hope they turned out okay. Now we'll see what we can do about putting the dots in there. Boy, those are tiny. This process goes along with my t-shirt that says, it's simple, but it's complicated. You know, I'm just drilling simple little holes and I'm trying to fill it with simple little wooden pieces. But it has been incredibly complicated. I have made little tiny dots out of wood with my laser cutter. I tried to make them out of ebony so they would just be solid black. Well, would you not know that when you make them small like that, that they just turn to charcoal because you have to turn the laser cutter up so hot on ebony to get it to even cut the ebony. So I went back to sycamore and cut them out of sycamore, then dyed them black. So they are all dyed black, and I am pressing them into the holes here now. It's just gotten crazy hard. It's been much more complicated than even that. I'm just sparing you the details. When I tell you it's complicated, you can trust me that it was. And I'm trying to get them to line up with the holes, and even that's not working really well. I have had to increase the size of the hole a little bit to a 1/16 inch bit from a 1.5 millimeter. That's only a few thousandths bigger, but that seems to be what worked on the first one. Now the trick is getting it to work on camera with the second one. And so far, not so good. I think I got it in there. Oops. Yeah. Well, I think I did. Well, the problem is that I got it in there. It didn't go flush, so now the dye has come off of it. So now I'm going to have to take a micromillimeter brush and just dye that little dot. That's what I was afraid was going to happen, but we'll get it done one way or the other. I could make myself a little tiny ebony dowel. That's not all that terribly easy to do either. That one went flush, no problem. So that one worked. This, like I said, the whole process has just not been as easy as it should be, and it truly should be easy. You can see the process, and it's very time-consuming and arduous task, so I will show you what it looks like when I'm finished with it. For my 10 cents worth of opinion, I think that's looking really nice. You can see the dots on the side there, and they turned out pretty well. I really like these wooden dots as opposed to the other types of dots. It just looks classy to me, and I think it's going to look real classy once we get it oiled up and once there's a finish on this side to make these sides pop. I think it's going to look really, really nice. So let's get her glued on the mandolin. Well, we're getting down to the old brass tacks. And I guess all that means is when you get down to the brass tacks, that means that you're just about to finish your upholstery job or something like that. I would say you're ready to call it finished. And so that's about where we're at here. It looks like there's a little overspray of lacquer in a place or two, so I didn't see that till just now. I've got the tooth blade here, and I'm just going to scratch the surface to just give it some cling, and this will get rid of 90% of that overspray lacquer. I think that looks fine. It wouldn't hurt to tooth the back of this just a little bit because it's pretty slick also, but I'm not going to do much. I don't really want it to have a super heavy bite. If you ever need to take it off, it just makes it easier. So having it slick is a good idea, really, on a fretboard. But I think that'll be fine. That gives it just a little tiny bit of bite there. And I've already put my locating pins in. There's a pin here and a pin here, so that when I put this on here, they go into the holes, and now it won't move. So, in other words, you can clamp it down, confident it's going to stay where you clamp it. And trust me, that's important when you're gluing flat surfaces with glue because they like to move. And we will get this coated really well. Again, I'm not as concerned about how great of a bond it is on a fretboard, although, you know, you want a good bond, don't get me wrong, because that's part of your strength. Like the bridge area, it's all important. Here, it's important, but not crazy. So And I got way more glue on there than I need, so I guess I'll just go ahead and spread it on the other side. That helps them both dry a little faster when you get them spread out real thin, and they'll become tackier quicker. That's plenty good for this job. It's more than adequate. And I roll it around till I feel it hit those holes, and then it's there. It doesn't move. And now I can clamp it with confidence that it's not going to move. And I'll put this one at this end. These already have rubber on them, but I'm going to go ahead and put some more leather, especially on the bottom side. Not too worried about the top side since it's much harder wood for one thing. Being flat also, it won't dig in too badly. I'm going to put this one on the neck heel so that we can get a real good clamp on that. A lot of squeeze out coming out already. I like lots of clamps on my necks. A lot of your strength comes from this in terms of your underbow and all that kind of thing that happens to necks. So getting this really tight is a good idea. Yeah, that's looking real good. I think I'm going to put a pad on this mostly because I just don't want to smash the fret. You don't have to go crazy tight, but real snug tight is a good idea. All right, it's all clamped up real well. Now I'm going to remove all the squeeze out. A lot of different ways to do that. I'll start with a damp cloth, I guess, and knock off as much of it as I can with the damp cloth. And then we'll go to a paintbrush if we need to reach into places where we can't get the cloth to go very well. It's not too bad. We'll clean up the other side and then we'll detail it.
And beyond measure, a gifted man you see, blessed by God.
It's difficult, probably impossible to show on the camera. There is glue back up underneath this little extension, and the only way you're going to get that is with like a paintbrush like this. You really can't hardly see it anyway, but it's nice to clean up everything if you can. Little minor amount of detail right in here. A little glue that I can get. I think that's about as good as I can do. So we're going to let that thing set for a day or so, only because I got so much other stuff to do. Otherwise, I'd be back on it tomorrow morning, but probably not until Monday now, because today is Friday. So we'll see you on Monday at least. Well, it's the following Monday morning, and you can see that virtually the mandolin is complete, except for the truss rod cover, the nut, of course, the setup, you know. The fretboard is only on there in rough shape. The neck still has to be fitted to it, and that's going to mess up the finish in places, and we're going to have to touch that up, but that's just the way it is. Part of building one, especially when my process of learning how to build it with this new wood binding. I really like the looks of the wood binding. I just think it looks rich. I think it's going to look really nice once the finish is over it and everything, and it kind of pops. But right now, I've got to work on making this fit up because you can feel it right there. It doesn't match perfectly. It's not bad, but it just needs to be better. This is a double cut file. It's a small file. It's only a 4-incher. It actually cuts fast, but it cuts pretty smooth also.
To design this mandolin for me.
Parts of the neck were still left rough in this area because I knew I had to work on it, so I'm going to have to probably take the whole neck down and do it all over more or less. Plus, I think it's still a little thick through here. So there's quite a bit of work that I'm going to do on this, and it's all pretty much by hand. It's all just fit up and feel, aesthetics. It's just that final detail that you got to do to get it right. And you know, I can tell it's just a little bit big right now. It's not real big, but it just needs some work. So I'm mostly going to do that off camera just to save film. But basically it's just doing more of this until I get it where I want it, and then I'll show you what it looks like, and then we'll stain it up and make it match. Well, I've got the neck and the fretboard all cleaned up and fitting real well, and you can see I've got it taped off for the final finish touch-up, and we're ready to start that right now. Again, with the yellow undercoat base, by taping this off, I'm hoping not to get much of it on the binding, but I know how this stuff runs everywhere, so I'd say the odds of me keeping it off the binding are slim, but hopefully not too much. And we're going to go to the dark brown now, and we'll also be using a lot of alcohol. I always started in the darkest areas and worked out, because by the time you get worked out a little bit, then it'll be a little bit lighter for the sunbursting effect. And then I touch it a lot lighter in the lighter areas, and then I'll use the alcohol to blend it. Got the denatured alcohol on the cloth now, and now I can start rubbing this and blending this out. See, that looks really nice, I think. Can't really tell anything happened to it now. And now the only other thing is I'm going to get the airbrush with some tinted lacquer and touch up the corners and the darkest areas. It's more like a paint, a slightly opaque paint, and then I think we'll be good. I'm going to put a little lacquer in this airbrush container here. That should be more than enough for the little job we're doing. I want to put a little lacquer retarder in there. I'm hesitant to pour it directly in there, but I think I just will try that anyway. Don't want to get too much in there, but I don't want it to turn white on me. And now I just need to get a little lacquer thinner and then some dye. Here's the lacquer thinner, and I'll put several of these in there as well. Well, actually I want to put quite a bit of the brown in here because I want it fairly dark. That should be dark enough. That's quite a bit more material than I was expecting. I put more thinner in there than I probably needed. Might have to go back and add a little more lacquer, but one thing about it, it'll dry fast this way. So this turned out to be a little more material than I was expecting. I got a little more thinner in there than I was planning on. I think it'll work, and it'll just dry fast. If it doesn't work, well then I'll come back and add some more actual lacquer to it as well. My friends, you may have heard me say, I haven't said it lately I don't think, but I do say it occasionally, whenever you're spraying a finish, there is an infinite number of possibilities that you can get whenever you're spraying a finish. This is one I got this time. You can't see it probably as well on video, but I can see it. It flashed and turned milky around the edges, and it's just kind of a translucent white looking finish. So I got to sand basically everything off that I put on it this morning and try it again. Put more retarder in the lacquer this time. It's very, very, very humid out today, so it's not a good day to be putting the finish on anyway, but I really do want to get this thing finished. So I'm trying to make hay while the sun's not shining. Doesn't always work. My friends Caleb and I just had our nerves racked for the last 15 minutes as we were drilling the holes for this peg head. We didn't film it. I just make my little jig. Matter of fact, this is my jig, which I made from a Stumac purchased jig. I purchased the little Stumac drill guide, clamped it to something like this. The reason I like this better is I can drill all of the peg holes at once. I clamp this on there and, you know, put a backer board behind it so there's no tear out, and then I just drill straight through this. Now this is drilling the 1/4-inch holes, and then I have to come back with the reamer bit that reams it out for the bushings. It's a 2-step operation, but you can see there it's just looking beautiful. What I really wanted to point out is even with the bushings in there and all that drilling, they fit even better than a glove. I just wanted to point out I'm not having to force them in there. They just go in perfectly smooth, and you can just see how smooth that went in there just now. That means that there's no pinching or none of the posts are slightly off. I mean, everything is just as good as it gets on this kind of thing. So, one more step down in the process of building this Canada mandolin. Now I'm going to drill all the little holes. So I've got to find a bit that I'm satisfied with that will drill the holes for these screws. And we will do that next. I've got my little bit there, or my drill that I use. I don't know what size this is. I've just had the tape on it for years and I've used it countless times. I just center it by eye, drill very slowly at first till I'm convinced I'm in the center. Then I drill down to where the tape just about comes in contact with the tuning key. You could, and I often do, put a little mark there where the center is. But actually, centering it this way works just about perfect for me. Your results might vary. And this makes it a one-step operation instead of 2 steps. And I think I actually get better results this way. And if you don't think those holes are perfectly centered, just look at that. You can see they're drilled in there and they're just about as perfectly centered as you ever expect them to be. And so we'll do that again on this side. Just making sure that I've got it down in there all the way first. And again, I just start it really slow and make sure that it's right dead center of the hole. And those look real centered as well. Now, as I drive these screws in, I always use wax. And typically I use the beeswax just because it's such a natural product. But I gotta be honest with you and tell you that I think paraffin does a better job overall. So if you've got paraffin wax laying around, that's what I would use to drive your screws. And especially new screws into a hard wood like this, paraffin's very good. And I'm not going to drive these home, I'm just going to drive them down close to home, get them all in there first, and then tighten them. Start them all before you tighten any, as old Jeff would say, from elderlyiron.com. And that would be Jeff Bradshaw. Look him up on YouTube, he's got some great videos. Well, you see the process here. I'll finish putting the rest of these screws in there, and then we'll go on to the next step. Well, my friends, sometimes I get excited toward the end of a project and maybe just forget to turn the camera on every once in a while. So I've made quite a few advancements since last you saw this. I have fit the bridge to the top by sanding it. I've made a new antler saddle for it. I've mounted the tailpiece, haven't put on the end pin yet. I've leveled, recrowned all the frets, leveled the fretboard. I have actually got the first string on it. We've mounted the tuning keys. Everything's fine there. So the action's already starting to look real good and have just got the first string on it. So it's looking like it's going to be just about right. Might have to raise it, in fact, even just a hair or two, which is always good. As a general rule of thumb, where these adjusters are concerned, you don't want them typically bottomed all the way out. You want just a hair of airspace under them. You know, so that's about where we're going to be here. If you can see that right there, that's the only one that's adjusted at the moment. It's up just a hair, and that's going to put this still pretty low. Might have to go up a little bit more. You want at least a little bit of airspace between there because it seems to kill the vibration otherwise. So that's the way I like to set them up. Other folks may have a different opinion. But I'm going to go ahead and string this thing up, and I promise you I won't play it at all until you get to hear the very first notes on it. Well, my friends, I think I've got it set up pretty well. The intonation's pretty good, the action's pretty good. You know, I haven't really played it exactly. I did make one chord on it by accident. I forgot and did that, but other than that, only other notes I've played are just to tune it. And I do have it in pretty good tune. It looks like this bridge is just a little bit crooked there, so I'm going to straighten that up. Got that straight now, and now I'll have to retune it. So I'll tune it and then I'll play it for you. Okay, I think we've got her all tuned up, so let's play it for you. Very first chord notes that it's making here. little bit of buzz. I've got the action pretty darn low. That's a fairly thin pick, and you can see it's holding it there. That's at the, what, the 9th fret or something, or 10th fret. There's the 12th fret. So it's pretty low. I probably have it a little bit too low, but I am hearing just a little tiny bit of buzzing. Well, I'm going to have to adjust the action just a little bit up, which will even give it a little bit more volume, a little more punch probably. And I'll be back with you in just a second. Tuned up again, and you can still see the action still very low. It's holding a pick here at the 8th, 9th fret, somewhere in there, that's a 1.14 millimeter, I believe. And I haven't checked that one. This one might even be thinner, but I think that's what it is. But certainly holds it easily at the 7th fret, holds it at the 8th. At the 9th, it's a little loose. At the 10th, it starts to fall back out. So that's pretty low action. Feeling a little bit of sharpness on the saddle here, but not much. Just knock it down just a tiny bit. Well, I really like it. It sounds good. It's got a good, clear voice. In other words, it sounds just about like all the rest of my build. I'm pretty happy with it. It's very, very consistent. A little bit of Nashville blues. Yeah, just needs a little playing in. I'm pretty happy with it. What do you think there? It's a nice little mandolin. I'm pretty darn happy with it. We don't have the truss rod cover on it yet. And by the way, this has not been buffed out yet. I'm going to take the strings all off of it, do a final light sanding and buffing and polishing, waxing, the whole bit. I just wanted to get it all set up and playable before I did that. And after I wax it, I think it'll even sound just that much better. So I'm pretty happy with it so far. I don't see any real problems. I don't see any issues. Everything is just like it ought to be. So we'll get back to you here in a little bit. My friends, I'm getting down to the wire on the Canada mandolin. I have unstrung it, and I am now going to give it one final hand buffing and maybe even a little on the buffing wheel and put it all back together and put it in the case and be ready to ship it off. But right now we've got quite a bit of hand work ahead of us, so here we go. I'm going to start right in the middle, and I'm going to use some 1500 grit sandpaper. Right where the bridge was sitting on there, it has kind of dulled the finish, and I'm going to try to bring that back with this 1500. It kind of just does that every time, and it'll do it again, but at least for now I think this will harden it up, smooth it out, and make it look really nice. You know, the finish is continuing to harden on this and to cure, so it just takes a while before that, you know, finally quits messing with the finish. But I believe this 1500 sandpaper will smooth it out where you won't even be able to tell it. And then we'll put the bridge on it the last final time. In fact, I'm probably just going to go over the whole thing with 1500 and 2000 and then buff it out with the semi-chrome polish probably. I never did really do a final buffing on the top after the last coats of finish. The last coat went on really smooth, but this will just make it that much better. Well, that's the 1500 on the top, and now I'm going to go with the 2000. I think that's going to do, or at least I think it will. We'll wipe it down and see what it looks like. Another dry cloth and wipe it down one more time. Not too bad. We're going to go over to the buffing wheel, I think, first and see what that does to it. If that doesn't do it, well then I'll do it by hand with the semi-chrome. Well, I spent quite a bit of time on the buffing wheel on this thing, and honestly I don't think it could be much better. You know, I don't see any point going any further with that part of it, but I am going to coat it on the top and the back with this Renaissance wax just to help harden up the finish just that much more. This is a great, you know, protector, I think. It's a really nice wax. All paste waxes are more work to put on and take off, but in my opinion they're worth it. And you want to take it off almost as quick as you put it on. You don't want to give it much time to dry. If you let it dry, they're very hard to get off. Even when you wipe it off immediately, they're not that easy to get completely off. One of the tricks is to keep your rag turning constantly. Don't keep wiping with the same side of your rag in the same place, or you'll never get the wax off of it. There you go. That's what it looks like after the wax. You can't get one much shinier than that, I don't think. We're going to do the same thing to the top. There you go. That looks good to me. You got to know when to quit. That's the trick. As this is brand new, I'll go ahead and apply the wax to the sides on this one as well. Typically, I do the wax just on the top and the back because that helps with the sound in addition, I think. But in this case, since this is brand new finish and everything's new, we'll go ahead and wax the sides on this one too. Try to wipe it down pretty quickly and buff it back out pretty quickly. My friends, I believe the Canada mandolin is just as finished as it'll ever be. And I gotta be honest with you, I'm probably at least as proud of this one as any mandolin I've ever built. I love the binding on this thing. Hopefully the camera will focus there and let you see the binding. It really is just gorgeous. I am so happy with it. Couldn't be more pleased. Give you a good still shot of the peg head there. And the fella's name is on there also. And by now he knows that he is receiving this because this was a gift from his son-in-law. So it is a total surprise to him. There's a look at the back. You can see how shiny it is. Very, very happy with it. There's a close-up of the rose that was carved in the back. Of course, the rose in the front here was more detailed because it was made with the laser cutter. Anyway, it's got a real good sound. Just give you an idea here. Yeah, it's just got it all over. I'll bring the camera up close and I'm going to play you a tune that I wrote I wrote this, gosh, it's got to be 15 years ago now, I guess. I wrote it on a mandolin that I built for a young girl. Her name was Jenny Vaughn. And the day I finished her mandolin, I wrote this mandolin piece on her mandolin. Jenny is a grown woman now with children, so that'll give you some idea. It's been quite a while. I don't know exactly how many years, but I want to play Jenny Vaughn for you right now on this Canada mandolin. It's in the key of A minor. Well, that was one time through of Jenny Vaughn, a song that I wrote on a mandolin many years ago. Never play it for anybody. But I hope you've enjoyed this series on this Canada mandolin. Melissa just has said multiple times that this is the most beautiful mandolin she's ever seen. And I gotta be honest with you, I'm pretty taken with it myself. I love this binding. It shows up so much better in person than it even does on the camera here. It just sets it off. It really does. It's just awesome. I'm glad I put that binding on there. And probably from now on, they'll all have sycamore binding if I have anything to say about it. Friends, it's time to put the label in this Canada mandolin, as it is going in a box very shortly and headed to Canada. There's what the label looks like. Maybe you can see the serial number. Here is another label that is going to go in the bottom, and you can read that and perhaps see the serial number yet again. I'm going to put this label in the bottom down here, and I'm putting this label in the top up here. And I always put the labels in so that when the mandolin is being held playing, someone could read it through the hole. So that's the way I typically put them in. Others put them in the other ways. You know, it's just a preference, I guess. It's the way I've always done it. I'm using liquid hide glue to glue them in. Seems to be really good for gluing in paper. Sticky, and it dries quickly. And of course I'm making a total mess out of it. So probably got a little more glue on there than I need, so I'm going to try to knock a little bit of that back off. And then I'll insert it down through the sound hole here. I typically slide them around with a paintbrush like this. This is just about perfect, so I'm going to go ahead and take the paintbrush then and use that to smush it down to the back, get the air out. The top label is in there, as you might be able to see if we get the light just right, which maybe will never happen. Maybe you can see it, but I don't know if you can or not. But it is in there. Yeah, there you can see it a little bit. Okay, so we're going to put the other label in on the bottom side. Put a little less glue on this one so I don't make such a mess, maybe. And with that, the Canada mandolin is on its way to its new home. So my friends, I hope you enjoyed the series on building this Canada mandolin. I really couldn't be more proud of it. I absolutely love it. I wish I could keep it. But alas, that's why I build them. Thank you so much for watching. If you're not yet subscribed, please click the subscribe button, and I would really appreciate a thumbs up. Thank you very much.